Cluster bombs, Biden defends decision to send Ukraine controversial weapons. U.S. President Joe Biden has defended his very difficult decision to give Ukraine cluster bombs, which have a record of killing civilians. The president said it had taken him a while to be convinced to do it, but he had acted because the Ukrainians are running out of ammunition. Ukraine's leader hailed the timely move, but human rights groups and some Democrats criticized the decision. A Moscow envoy slammed Washington's cynicism. Mr. Biden told CNN in an interview on Friday that he had spoken to allies about the decision, which comes ahead of a NATO summit in Lithuania next week. Cluster bombs are banned by more than 120 countries, but have been used by both Russia and Ukraine during the war. National Security Adviser Jake Sullivan told Friday's daily White House briefing that officials recognize the cluster munitions create a risk of civilian harm from unexploded bombs. "This is why we've deferred the decision for as long as we could." Mr. Sullivan said Ukraine was running out of artillery and needed a bridge of supplies while the U.S. ramps up domestic production. "We will not leave Ukraine defenseless at any point in this conflict period," he said. The munitions have caused controversy over their failure, or dud, rate, meaning unexploded small bombs can linger on the ground for years and indiscriminately detonate later on. Mr. Sullivan told reporters the American cluster bombs being sent to Ukraine were far safer than those he said were already being used by Russia in the conflict. He told reporters the U.S. ones have a dud rate of less than 2.5%, while Russia's have a dud rate of between 30 to 40%, he said. Mr. Biden's move will bypass U.S. law prohibiting the production, use, or transfer of cluster munitions with a failure rate of more than 1%. Early on in the war, when the White House was asked about allegations that Russia was using cluster and vacuum bombs, the then press secretary said it would be a potential war crime if true. Marta Hurtado, speaking for the UN Human Rights Office, said on Friday, the use of such munitions should stop immediately and not be used in any place. Russia's ambassador to the U.S. criticized Mr. Biden's decision. The cruelty and cynicism with which Washington has approached the issue of transferring lethal weapons to Kiev is striking, Anatoly Antonov was quoted as saying by TASS news agency. Now, by the fault of the U.S., there will be a risk for many years that innocent civilians will be blown up by submunitions that have failed. Russian President Vladimir Putin has previously accused the U.S. and its allies of fighting an expanding proxy war in Ukraine. But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky thanked the U.S. president for a timely, broad, and much-needed military aid package worth $800 million, 626 M. He tweeted that it would bring Ukraine closer to victory over the enemy, and democracy to victory over dictatorship. Ukraine's counteroffensive, which began last month, is grinding on in the eastern Donetsk and southeastern Zaporizhzhia regions. Last week, Ukraine's military commander-in-chief Valery Zelensky said the campaign had been hampered by a lack of adequate firepower, and expressed frustration with the slow deliveries of weapons promised by the West. Pentagon spokesman Colin Kahl said giving Ukraine cluster munitions would let the Russians know that the Ukrainians are going to stay in the game when it comes to the war. Human rights groups criticized the decision, with Amnesty International saying cluster munitions pose a grave threat to civilian lives, even long after the conflict has ended. The U.S. Cluster Munition Coalition, which is part of an international civil society campaign working to eradicate the weapons, said they would cause greater suffering, today and for decades to come. Reaction from U.S. lawmakers on Capitol Hill to the decision to send cluster munitions to Ukraine has been mixed, with some Democrats labeling the decision alarming and a terrible mistake. Adam Smith, a Washington Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee, had a different view, telling the BBC the White House had made the right call. Making sure that the Ukrainians can retake their territory is one of the most important things we can do to help reduce civilian casualties, he said. In a joint statement, Republican leaders on the House and Senate Foreign Affairs Committees said the Democratic president's move would allow Ukraine's forces to target and eliminate Russian forces more efficiently. There was no immediate backlash from allies to Mr. Biden's plan. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said the military alliance took no position on cluster munitions. More than 120 countries have committed to the Convention on Cluster Munitions, agreeing not to use, produce, transfer, or store such devices. The U.S., Ukraine and Russia are not party to the agreement. Germany, which has signed the ban treaty, said it would not provide such bombs to Ukraine, but expressed understanding for the American position. We're certain that our US friends didn't take the decision about supplying such ammunition lightly, German government spokesman Stefan Hebestreit told reporters in Berlin. We need to remember once again that Russia has already used cluster ammunition at a large scale in its illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. Human Rights Watch said both sides had used the weapons in the war, causing numerous deaths and serious injuries to civilians. Thank you for watching my video. For more videos, stay connected and must subscribe my